Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's lecture at Hillwood virtually. We are letting everybody in from the Zoom waiting room, and we are seeing that folks are coming in, but we're just going to give everybody a chance to get into the webinar before we start our program. Again, a nice big welcome to everyone to tonight's lecture. We are letting our folks all join us from the Zoom waiting room. It just takes a minute or so for folks to filter in. We welcome you tonight. We're so pleased to have everybody here. We're just gonna take just a couple more seconds to let folks come on in from the Zoom waiting room. Good to have everybody here tonight. Okay, I think we have, I think, a good crowd for tonight. I'm going to just welcome again, and I'm going to hand us over to Kate Markert.
Thank you, Audra. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. Welcome to the second lecture in our series that's inspired by our exhibition, Natural Beauties, Exquisite Works of Minerals and Gems. The series will end with next Tuesday's talk by Dr. Jan Stewart from the Freer Sackler. But of course, we have lots of other programs that I think you will be interested in joining us for. The floral how-tos with Amy Wilbur are just fabulous. If you haven't tried one, I recommend them. So we have one about autumn and then another coming up in December, or several about holiday centerpieces. So Jeff, if you'll advance the slide, we can talk about some of the other programs that we have coming up. The on-demand virtual film festival, One Woman, One Vote. That's really going to be a very interesting series, and you'll get to meet people that I guarantee you've never heard of, but should. And then, of course, my favorite program of all, the Halloween Spooky Pooch Festival, which is fun from home. You will not want to miss that. That's images of all of our wonderful costumed dogs. And we have a great opportunity for you to hear from Ellen Charles about the Post family dogs. So that's really a lot of fun. And then, of course, we're open just a little later on Friday nights in October. And so if you want to come by and have a drink or a little something from the cafe, I hope you'll join us. I do hope if you're in the DC area, you'll come by and see the exhibition before it closes on January 3rd. And just so you know, we're open Tuesday through Sunday, and we're doing all we can to ensure that you have a comfortable and safe environment. And of course, we want to be sure we're managing social distancing. And so therefore, we require advanced reservations and timed entry in order to come. So if you're not able to visit Hillwood, then we hope you will join us virtually for lunch and a virtual docent-led tour every Friday. So please join us for those. They're wonderful. So now it's time for my usual reminders about Zoom. Please get comfortable. We can't see or hear you, but of course we want to hear from you. Send your questions through the Q&A module as they cross your mind, and we'll get to them at the end. And of course, please say hello in the chat. So now tonight, I am thrilled to welcome a great friend of Hillwood, Dr. Jeffrey Post. Jeff is currently the chairman of the Department of Mineral Sciences at the Smithsonian Institution, and he has served as the curator of the National Gem and Mineral Collection since 1991. He served as the lead curator for the Janet Annenberg Hooker Hall of Geology, Gems, and Minerals, which opened in 1997. Jeff holds bachelor degrees in geology and chemistry from the University of Wisconsin, and he has earned a PhD in chemistry with a specialty in geochemistry from Arizona State University. He's spoken several times at Hillwood, and it is always a pleasure to have him return. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Post.
Kate, thank you very much for that introduction. It is great to hear about all the things going on at Hillwood. You can see behind me the Hall of Geology, Gems, and Minerals at the Smithsonian Institution. And unfortunately, that's pretty much the way it looks all the time there right now, which is no one in there, because the Museum of Natural History is one of the Smithsonian museums that has remained closed. And even as staff, we're only able to go in very occasionally. So it's fun to have a chance to think about our collection and talk about gems and minerals and feel like we're kind of part of this museum world again. When I was asked to give this talk about going along with the new exhibition, new exhibition, Natural Beauties, I was excited because it would give me an opportunity to focus on parts of our collection at the Smithsonian that maybe get a little less attention. Some of the stones, the lapidary, the artistic work that we have in the collection that isn't always featured as much as some of our other materials. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and the museum closed, and all of these things I thought I was going to get access to in the collection and talk about suddenly were off limits. So the talk's a little different than I originally imagined, but fortunately I was able to get a lot of the images that I was looking for, and hopefully tonight can still convince you that there is a great richness in nature's art in stone. And so I'm going to start with, let's see, let me go to the next slide here. For some reason I got a second advance my, oh, there we go. Well, for those people that visit the Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian or go to gem exhibits, when we talk about gem materials, commonly what people think of are, of course, faceted gemstones, and such as the ones shown here. Cut, polished mineral crystals, and these are sort of our traditional sense of gems, and of course we have many wonderful examples of these on exhibit. But it turns out that these are also spectacular examples of gem materials shown in a perhaps less traditional, in some ways even more creative way, and demonstrating that the natural world, the creative world of stones and lapidary materials is very rich and quite varied. The kinds of things you see here, boxes and carvings and bowls and all, kind of fall under the general category of objet d'art, or objects of art. And it's amazing the kinds of creativity that people have brought to the world of lapidary materials in this category. And so this evening, what I want to focus on are more the kinds of objects that we see here, the kinds of materials, the stones, the minerals that are used in these kinds of objects of art. Now, the general term, if you go to many museums, particularly art museums, and see carvings and sculptures done out of stone, they're often referred to as hard stones. And I have to admit, when I first heard that term, I was completely baffled, because to me, every stone I've ever picked up or been hit in the side of the head with, it's a hard stone. And it was I couldn't quite figure out what they meant by soft stones. But it turns out this is a general term, not necessarily well defined, but it comes from the Italian pietra dura, hard stone. And this term pietra dura also is a description of a particular kind of artistic use of these hard stones, these lapidary materials, of which the table at Hillwood is a wonderful example. In fact, it's one of my favorite pieces in the entire house. And this is just a small portion of it, showing the beautiful inlay stones, all the different kinds of stones that were cut, polished, put together in Florence, Italy, almost 100 years ago. And so an example of the great artistry, the creativity that can be applied when using a variety of different geologic materials. And so this evening, what I'm going to try to focus on are some of the minerals, the geologic materials that are not things that at least I would traditionally think of as gem materials, but in fact, people have creatively used to produce all kinds of beautiful and wonderful objects. And in some cases, nature herself did a marvelous job of just being the artist all by herself. So we're going to start though with a mineral that is, I think, familiar to most people, and one that's certainly a critical part of many of the hard stones that you'll see in the exhibition at Hillwood and other places. And so we're starting with quartz. And I think most people have seen quartz crystals you see in the upper left. And in fact, quartz crystals have mesmerized people for millennia. These were first recovered high in the mountains in the Alps, and the ancient Greeks, when seeing these and considering where they came from, they thought that these must be ice that was frozen so hard that they just wouldn't melt. I mean, there was nothing like them they've ever seen before in nature. And in fact, the name kristallos is the Greek ice and the word we use for crystals today, and applied originally to quartz crystals such as these. And of course, quartz crystals, nice, clear, large crystals, can be cut, faceted, shaped into things like this faceted egg on the upper right that is over 7,000 carats, about 6 inches tall, or the more traditional faceted gemstones in the lower right. And of course, quartz comes in all different colors. So we've got yellow of citrine or purple amethyst or rose quartz, all of those things. Quartz can also be fashioned into some really interesting art objects. This is a recently done piece donated to us by Michael Diber. It's in a material called ametrine, a cut from crystals of quartz that contain the yellow of citrine, the purple of amethyst mixed together, mined in Bolivia, and cut into this beautiful object that stands about 3 inches tall. This is all work that he does by hand. And then we also have another example of something cut from large chunks of crystalline quartz, and that's this quartz sphere. And again, throughout history, quartz spheres have fascinated people. Well, this is the largest known flawless quartz crystal ball in the world. And it's one that you can see from the historic photograph we've had on exhibit at the Smithsonian actually since 1925. It's one of the oldest objects that's been on continuous exhibit at the Smithsonian. And this, just a very brief background to this sphere. It was brought into the United States in 1924, claimed by the owner to be an antiquity. Well, the intrepid customs agents at the time did their research and determined that it had been fabricated the previous year in Shanghai, China. And so they put a big import duty on it, they put a fine on it, and it sat then in customs sort of at this impasse between the owner who didn't want to pay the duty and customs who demanded it. Well, one of the people who became aware of the sphere was an engineer from Cleveland by the name of Worcester Reed Werner. And he was an engineer that had designed some of the great telescopes of the day back in the 1920s. So was very aware of the optical properties of quartz, but aware what a special piece this sphere was. So he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Smithsonian saying, this thing was in customs, there's nothing like it in the world, it's one of the most spectacular things he's ever heard of, that this is something that people should see, and perhaps if the Smithsonian would ask, customs would loan it so it could be exhibited for a short time. So in fact, the Secretary of the Smithsonian did ask customs, they did agree to loan it, and it came to the museum. And then eventually, after Worcester Reed Werner, after he passed away, his widow arranged to pay off the duty to purchase the sphere so that it could be then transferred permanently to the Smithsonian and has been on exhibit there ever since. And believe me, if I could look in this sphere right now and figure out what's going to happen 2 weeks from now after the election, well, wouldn't that be wonderful? Or maybe not, I don't know. Okay, well, so those are the kinds of things that can be produced from these large crystals of quartz. Well, quartz also occurs in nature in another form. And these varieties of quartz are referred to as microcrystalline quartz. And these are some examples, 3 different examples of microcrystalline quartz. And in each of these, the quartz crystals are so tiny, the individual crystals are so small that we need a magnifying glass or even a microscope to see them. And these individual tiny crystals all grow into these amazing textures and shapes and the colors to produce some of the most beautiful artwork in nature. And so it's these microcrystalline varieties of quartz that commonly get carved or used in various kinds of hardstone applications, and are what I'd like to talk to now for a little bit. So thinking about microcrystalline quartz, well, it's never simple, is it? Well, it turns out there are 2 different types of microcrystalline quartz that are found in nature. There's the chalcedony and chert. If we look at chalcedony on the left under a microscope, we see that the individual quartz crystals are shaped like fibers. And it's this fibrous texture that is characteristic of chalcedony. The crystals may be only a few microns across, but could be hundreds of microns long. And these fibrous crystals tend to grow on top of each other over and over in layers. And this fibrous texture gives chalcedony kind of a satiny look and a translucent nature to it. And the kinds of materials that we think of for chalcedony are things like agates and carnelian and onyx. The other types of microcrystalline quartz we find are called cherts. And if we look at chert under a microscope, as we see on the right-hand side, and the scale bar there is 500 microns, the individual crystals are more granular shaped. And so it gives them a more of a sugary texture, and the crystals are a little bit larger than in chalcedony, and so the materials tend to be more opaque, less transparent. And the kinds of things that fall into the category of chert are things like flint and jasper. So let's look at some examples first of chalcedony. Well, the most obvious one, the one that most people are aware of, is this concentrically banded variety of chalcedony, which is referred to as agate. So to be an agate, it has to show this concentric banding, and it has to be chalcedony. So we have individual layers of chalcedony that have grown one on top of another, and to form these really beautiful, elaborate textures. Now, how agate forms in nature is still, interesting, one of the challenging scientific questions. There is no yet absolute answer to how does agate form. We know that it tends to form in cavities or openings in rock. And these cavities or openings get filled with water that contains dissolved silica. And out of that water, silica crystals, quartz crystals, start to grow, lining the edges of the cavity. And then layer upon layer of these crystals grow one on top of the other until eventually, in many cases, they completely fill in that cavity. So the banding essentially reflects the shape of the outer side of the cavity in which the agate formed. And so you get an endless variety of shapes and patterns. Now, one of the things that make agates very popular are the variety of colors, and typically shades of reds to yellows, some grays to purples, and mostly these colors are due to impurities of iron oxides and manganese oxides. And if we look at a magnified view of a piece of agate, so we can see the banding, the horizontal banding, the layers of chalcedony crystals, and we see these dark colored inclusions. The dark colored inclusions are tiny little crystals of hematite or goethite, iron oxides, or some manganese oxides. And it's those little crystals of iron oxides or manganese oxides that give the colors to most of our agates. So agates are prized because of their texture, because of this banding and this transparency or translucency. And here's an example where an agate was used to create the spectacular chalice by the Bucciolati Company. And it was donated to the Smithsonian by John Maria Bucciolati, who was the patriarch of that family before he recently passed away, as the Smithsonian Cup. And he had found this chunk of agate at a gem show in Switzerland. And he was taken by the patterns, the texture of it, and he left it sitting on his desk, he said, for years. And finally, after looking at it for years, he got this idea that he wanted to create this cup, this chalice, out of this piece of agate. So in the end, you get this sort of plain as ordinary material, this relatively inexpensive agate material that now has been dressed up with all the beautiful gold work from Buccellati to create, which is arguably a very precious object. And when you hold this up to the light, the transparency of the light coming through the agate, it's absolutely mesmerizing. This is a portion of an agate bowl that is on display at the Edelstein Museum, the Gemstone Museum in Idar-Oberstein, Germany. And we'll talk a little more about that locality, Idar-Oberstein, a little bit later on. But it's a place where historically much of the great lapidary gem cutting work was done in Europe. And in the museum, they have some of their great treasures. This is a piece that was fashioned in about 1925 from an agate from Brazil, using just the wonderful detail of that agate. The bowl is called the Flame, very appropriately so. And here's just some examples of other agate specimens that we have in our collection. Agates are often named for the localities where they're found or the particular textures they have. This is from a place called Laguna in Chihuahua, Mexico. They're called Laguna agates. And you can see why people love to collect agates. It's like collecting art. Every agate is different. The colors, the patterns, no two are alike. And I have to say, I don't think I know any agate collectors that have a small collection, because once you get the first one, then you see the next one that's equally as beautiful and you want that one. And since no two are alike, it just never ends. And the collection grows and grows. And they are spectacular things. Again, the red and the yellow colors due to tiny inclusions of iron oxides in with the agate. Here's another example from that same locality in Chihuahua, Mexico. Some of the purples from a little bit of manganese in there. And a close-up of another from that same area. Again, it goes on and on. What a wonderful palette. This is from Montana, showing some of the same textures, but now in the darker brown colors. And this is just so beautiful, you got to look close at it. I mean, the detail, the closer you look, the more detail you see. I know artists that have almost made a living taking close-up pictures of small portions of agates or using those as inspirations to create paintings. In a minute, wouldn't this just look beautiful hanging on your wall, just as it is? Agates such as these are highly prized, as said, by collectors. It's not unusual to see a single slice of an agate like this sell for many thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars. Another example from a locality in Montana they call dry head agates. And from Lake Superior. I grew up in Wisconsin, and so one of our favorite treks was to head up to the shores of Lake Superior and pick amongst the gravels looking for Lake Superior agates. And this one is about fist size. We never found any that big, but we did find ones that were marble sized, and they show the same kinds of patterning, the color variations that you see in this Lake Superior agate. This one's from Minnesota. Another agate from Mexico with some of the coloring due to some amethyst along with the agate. Or another one from Laguna, Mexico. So we have the agate in the center. Imagine this is essentially a stalactite that grew out into a cavity, an opening in the rock. And after the agate formed, then it was surrounded by larger crystals of quartz as the growth conditions changed. This is an orbicular agate from Madagascar. It's also sometimes referred to as rainforest agate because of its deep green color. In addition to the iron oxides, there's probably some chromium in here giving rise to the color. Again, look at the detail. Sometimes this is referred to as a green jasper, but in fact, if you look carefully, you see the concentric layering that is characteristic of agate material. And you'll see this a lot. In fact, in the marketplace, you'll see the terms jasper and agate often used interchangeably. It drives those of us in the geology and gemology world crazy, but for people selling or buying it, whatever name is on it, they seem to be perfectly happy with that. So it can be very confusing at times. Here's a piece of dinosaur bone, sliced through dinosaur bone from Colorado. The individual vesicles in the original dinosaur bone have been filled in by agate, quartz, and the center, this large hole, who knows what happened there? It could have been kind of a sad thing for the dinosaur, but there's a big hole in the dinosaur bone that was filled in with concentric layers of chalcedony, agate, and then the very center filled in with some amethyst, larger crystals of quartz. And here's, I find, a very intriguing type of agate. It's called iris agate because of the rainbow effect that's produced, because the individual layers of chalcedony are so finely layered and are just the right spacing apart that these layers act as a diffraction grating, breaking the light into the various colors of the rainbow, hence the name iris agate. It's the same effect you see if you take a compact disc or a DVD and hold that in the light, and there you've got the tiny grooves on the CD reflecting and diffracting the light. You get the same effect here. So this is essentially a CD in stone, in agate. In some cases, the chalcedony form of quartz forms not as concentric layers, but as horizontal straight layers. And these horizontally layered or straight layered varieties of chalcedony are called onyx. So agate is concentrically layered, onyx is flat horizontal layers. And if it's black and white alternating layers, then it's called onyx. If it is layers of the red chalcedony, also known as carnelian or sard, along with white chalcedony, then it's referred to as sardonyx. And these are the materials that artists love to do creative things with, because you've got these two different colors layered one on top of the other. And of course, it's the classic material used to produce cameos, where an artist can carve through the white layer to create a head or other intricate carving down to the orange or black layer below, creating this contrast of color and this raised carving on the surface. So a traditional, very old form of art using sardonyx or onyx. The onyx is also prized because of the black color used in jewelry, and you see the black onyx sometimes also cut from black agates. So in this case, it's not technically onyx because it's concentrically layered like an agate, but because of the black and white alternating layers, the black portions are cut by lapidary people into the gem material known as onyx, or the layered black and white to do other creative artistic things with. Now, the term onyx can be a little bit confusing sometimes because it's also applied to a very different kind of mineral material. A type of rock called travertine, which is the mineral calcite, not quartz, is commonly marketed as either Mexican onyx or cave onyx, or sometimes just onyx. It's not at all the same thing as the quartz onyx we're just looking at. As I said, a very different material, calcite. It can be very attractive. It has this very nice banding, typically shades of browns and whites. It's softer, much softer than the quartz onyx, so it can be easily carved into things like chess sets or bowls, or used architecturally. And so it's a very beautiful material, but it's just not technically truly onyx. It is a different material. Sometimes chalcedony has growths of other minerals in that can be very artistic and very beautiful. In this case, we have dendritic growths of manganese oxides and iron oxides that grew on the surface of the chalcedony and then were covered over by another layer of quartz or chalcedony to produce what's called a dendritic agate. And even in cases where you don't see banding, people selling these often will call them agates just because they're chalcedony with these really intricate and very beautiful sort of scenes in them. Sometimes you'll also see these marketed as moss agates. Chrysoprase is this beautiful translucent green variety of chalcedony that gets its green color from trace amounts of nickel oxides in with the quartz. And historically, most of the great chrysoprase came from Australia, although some is also mined in Africa or Russia. And it's prized because of the green color, beautiful translucency. It's often made into beads, sometimes set into rings, other jewelry, various kinds of carvings. This is a snuff bottle in our collection. And in fact, the red stopper in there is a crystal of ruby from Burma. Okay, so now we'll leave chalcedony behind and we'll talk about the other type of microcrystalline quartz. And that, of course, was the cherts. And the colored varieties of chert are called jasper. So notice now we don't see concentric banding. Instead, it's a more chaotic looking sort of texture, more opaque. But look at the colors. Jasper is prized because of the just dramatic colors, the almost endless variety of patterns and shapes that exist in nature. And jaspers are found around the world, and they're often named because of the pattern they have, or the place they're found, or named after the person who found them, or just named whimsically. But you just see, here's 4 examples. I mean, I would put any one of these 4 up on my wall in my house. I mean, they're just spectacular things. The lower right is called wild butterfly jasper from Mexico. And the upper left is called bamboo jasper, also from Mexico. The upper right is it's called bumblebee jasper from Indonesia, although you also see in the upper right a little bit of banding, which will make some of that an agate. And then the lower left, that dramatic yellow and red, is called mukaite from Australia. So remember, jasper is the more granular form of quartz, more opaque. It's again inclusions of iron oxides, manganese oxides that give it a great variety of different colors. Here's a jasper that was displayed again at the Idlestone Museum in Idar-Oberstein. And I just love this piece of jasper, so I take a picture of it. It's from California, and it's called poppy jasper. I think it makes perfectly good sense to call that poppy jasper. This is from Bruno Canyon, Montana, a very well-known place that produces these sort of bulbous, almost ethereal-looking jaspers. Kind of looks like you're looking at a bunch of clouds in stone. And a lot of collectors prize jaspers that have colors in such a way they look like landscapes. And I don't know about you, but I see a sunset behind a forest of trees here. And so this would be in the category of landscape jaspers. Sometimes it's hills, it's mountains, it's valleys, it's whatever. But again, looking for these scenes in jasper has become an all-consuming passion for certain collectors and artists. Bloodstone or heliotrope is a type of jasper that has been prized by the ancients. The best material is found in India, and it's the green colored jasper with the red splotches, of course, the blood splotches of iron oxides to give it the distinctive colors. Bloodstone is also one of the historic birthstones for the month of March, along with aquamarine. And here at the Idlestone Museum, again in Idar-Oberstein, they very cleverly used some of this bloodstone material to create this wonderful carving of a frog on a green lily pad. And finally, before we leave quartz, I just wanted to talk about one other type of quartz material that is commonly used as a hard stone material in carvings and jewelry. And that, of course, is tiger's eye. And tiger's eye almost exclusively comes from South Africa, although some is now coming from Australia as well. And it's really made up of very elongated fibrous crystals of quartz. And there's still a lot of discussion about exactly how tiger's eye forms, but typically it's thought to form as quartz crystals sealing up or filling in cracks or veins in the rock. And of course, it's popular carving material, and what better thing to carve out of tiger's eye than a tiger? It's one of the pieces in our collection. And I had a chance to visit the locality in the southern Kalahari Desert in South Africa many years ago to see where this tiger's eye comes from. We were trying to better understand how it forms. And you can see the horizontal layers of the yellow tiger's eye in the rock there in the desert. And to the lower left, the slabs of tiger's eye, they're then dug out of these veins and eventually cut, polished, or carved. Okay, another obviously very important historically used hardstone material that's used in all kinds of carvings, art objects, but also weapons and tools is jade. And this jadeite dragon vase is one that is just stunning, 20 inches tall, spectacular example of jadeite showing the purples, the whites, the greens that are characteristic of that material. And this was a gift to our collection from Marjorie Merriweather Post. In about 1970, our curator at the time, George Switzer, was visiting a jade dealer, importer in California, and he saw this piece and he was just taken by it. He sent quickly a short note to Marjorie Merriweather Post saying, I have just seen the most spectacular jade carving I've ever known. It's just wonderful. We need this for the collection. And she quickly wrote back and simply said, buy it. And she transferred the money to the Smithsonian to make it possible to buy this piece for the collection. So this is a type of jade called jadeite, and it brings us to, again, the world being a little more complex than we like sometimes. Turns out that jade is not just one mineralogical material. There are two different mineral materials that have been used historically and are continued to be sold today under the name of jade. So the vase we just saw is the mineral and the type of jade called jadeite. And the other form of jade is called nephrite. And that's a very different mineral. The minerals in nephrite are actinolite and tremolite. So two different mineral materials, but they happen to look enough alike and have similar enough properties that both have been used as jade. And if we look, for example, on the left, this is a microscopic view of the structure of a piece of jadeite. And we see the individual blocky crystals in that microscopic view. They kind of look like pieces put together in a jigsaw puzzle. And it's that interlocking of those blocky pieces that make jadeite such a tough material, hard to break. And it's this toughness that also makes it possible to carve it into very delicate and intricate shapes without the fear of it breaking. Similarly with nephrite, looking at its structure under a microscope, we see that the nephrite, the actinolite tremolite crystals, are now actually fibrous, but it's the interlocking, the interweaving of those fibers that make that material equally tough, and therefore giving it the same hardness properties as jadeite. And so again, both of these can be sold as and are sold as jade. So jadeite typically, because of its structure, if you hold it up to light, there's a little more of a sugary texture to it, whereas the nephrite, because of the fibrous nature of the crystals, has a more silky or fibrous texture to it. So often you can tell the difference by looking at that texture. The jadeite is most commonly these days mined in northern Burma near the border with China, and it's found there typically as weathered cobbles, and these cobbles that are covered with a weathering rind, and so you can only see the jadeite on the inside if you break away or polish away some of that weathering rind to expose what's on the inside. Here we can see the green jadeite. Here's another example in our collection that stands about 2 feet tall. It's, well, 18 inches tall. And this is a jadeite cobble also from Burma or Myanmar. And you can see the weathering rind. And what they've done is they've used a diamond saw to cut a couple of different notches into the weathering rind to expose the jadeite interior. And then the Chinese characters are basically inventory information, because cobbles like these will then be sold at auction and go into the hands of carvers or people who will make other artistic things from the jadeite. For example, a piece of jadeite might end up as a carving like this one in our collection. This beautiful carving of a woman holding a little bunny. And so we've got the purple jadeite, the white, and the little bit of green is what got turned into a cute little bunny. And this is a jadeite carving that was given to the collection by a woman from Washington, D.C., Lillian Turner. And here's an example of some nephrite bowls that we have in our collection. The nephrite originally mined in British Columbia, Canada. Well, another great stone material that is prized because of its color, its textures, is carved, is made into jewelry, all kinds of things, is of course malachite. This is a slab of malachite, a slice we have in our collection from the Congo. It stands about 18 inches tall, so it's a nice big slice, and shows beautifully the range of color, the pattern, the textures that have made malachite such a popular lapidary material for centuries. And in fact, it's so beautiful, you got to take a closer look. And you see the different colors of banding, the intricacy of the banding. And so malachite is mined in places like the Congo as an ore of copper. It's a copper carbonate, and it's copper that gives it the deep green color. The variation in color in the banding is almost entirely due to differences in size of the individual crystals. The tiny crystals, smaller crystals give you the lighter colored bands, larger crystals give you the darker colored bands. In fact, here is a microscopic cross section. Looking at it now under a microscope, we can see the banding in the malachite. The dark bands show the larger crystals of malachite, and the lighter bands are made up of many smaller crystals. So it's light reflecting off the tiny little crystals that make it appear lighter colored. And of course, malachite has been popular going back centuries. Our sample was from the Congo, but a lot of historically the material was mined in Russia. There's some wonderful examples at Hillwood, for example. But a lot of that material in the 1700s made it to Europe. And these are some examples that are on exhibit at the Palace at Versailles in France. And also malachite is popular because its color, it's cut, polished, and placed into, in this case, a marble base, a type of artwork called intarsia. This was done in Jaipur, India. So malachite with turquoise and agate in marble. So another popular lapidary material that owes its color to copper is turquoise. It's a copper phosphate. Again, it's been prized for centuries because of its beautiful blue color. The carving on the left is Persian turquoise, mined mostly in Iran or areas along the border there. And on the right is a piece, a Zuni piece, Native American piece, featuring Arizona turquoise, which became popular in Native American artwork early in the 20th century, really. And this is a bracelet. That piece stands almost 6 inches tall, so it's a really large bracelet. Well, when talking about blue, though, it's hard to beat lapis lazuli. You know, this is a lapis lazuli piece that was just recently added to our collection. It was a gift from Jane Mitchell and Jeff Bland. It had been sort of freeform carved in Eder Oberstein, and originally is from Afghanistan, where most of the world's great lapis lazuli comes from. And it's a piece now currently on display. It weighs almost 200 pounds and shows beautifully the textures and the colors that make lapis lazuli such a popular lapidary material, such a popular hardstone material. And as I say, this comes from high in the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan, which is where most of the world's great lapis lazuli comes from. A small amount comes from Chile today, but the best material is still here in the mountains of Afghanistan, where even today, the mining is done largely by hand. Material is brought down on people's backs and backpacks, or by mule or by horses. And so to appreciate, lapis lazuli, you look at it close, we see it's not just a single mineral. In fact, it's a rock, and part of the texture, part of the beauty of it are all the different minerals mixed together. So the blue color is due to the mineral lazurite, and then along with it are related minerals, sodalite, hyaline, the white calcite, the gold flecks of pyrite. All of these together make this a really beautiful material. But it's the blue lazurite that really caught the attention of people in Europe, even as far back as the Renaissance or before, because of its value as a blue pigment. Painters, the great classic painters, used the blue lazurite, known as ultramarine, as the most prized source of blue. And when you think about nature, there aren't a lot of places to get blue pigment. When you think about what's blue in nature, you can't pull the blue out of the sky. A few blue flowers here and there. There's not a lot of other blue things. And so when lapis lazuli hit the scene, suddenly as this new blue pigment, ultramarine, it just changed everything. And it was highly prized, very expensive pigment. Nowadays, painters still use ultramarine, but they use a synthetic variation of it. Lapis lazuli can be carved as this reclining lady up above, and also made, of course, into jewelry. Very popular material. A very similar looking stone that's often used in carvings and art objects is a material known as sodalite. And this material is mostly from Canada, from Ontario, some nowadays coming from Pakistan as well. But notice that it sort of looks like lapis lazuli, but the color is a more purplish blue. And so they create all kinds of objects, including the lower left. Somebody carved a skull, of course, out of sodalite. In fact, if you go to the Tucson Gem Mineral Show, you see that people have carved skulls out of virtually everything, including meteorites. It's amazing. I don't quite understand the fascination, but there it is. So sodalite, like lapis lazuli, has a variety of different minerals, which gives it this interesting texture along with the color, making it very popular in jewelry, in beads, and in various kinds of carvings. A relatively newer material, only discovered as a mineral in the 1940s, is called sugilite. It's a manganese silicate that is mined out of the manganese ores in southern Africa. And it's prized because of its just delightful magenta purple colors. When you think about it, there aren't a lot of other mineral materials that have that color. And so it's now, again, made into beads, various kinds of carvings, used in jewelry. Another beautiful material that's been prized for many years is rhodochrosite. This is a polished slice cut through a series of parallel stalactites from a cave in northern Argentina. That's where most of the world's great rhodochrosite comes from. This piece is almost 3 feet in diameter, so it's a large piece. These stalactites are just like stalactites we find in caves all over the world, except the difference is most stalactites in caves are calcium carbonate, calcite. These stalactites are manganese carbonate or rhodochrosite. So when you cut into them, you get this beautiful deep red color that is cut into gemstones. It's used in jewelry and carvings, all kinds of decorative ways. Here, Nikolai Medvedev, amazing artist, created this intarsia box using a rhodochrosite cross-section in the lid and other rhodochrosite in the body of the box. In fact, Nikolai is an immigrant from Russia who learned after he came to the United States how to do intarsia and is now recognized around the world as one of the great artists in this craft. These are a couple more boxes we have in our collection that he created. So you see the beautiful malachite. You see in the upper left, the purple, the sugilite that we saw just a few slides back that he used in the box, along with opal and a variety of other minerals. Rhodonite has been used for centuries because of its beautiful pink color, the black manganese oxides mixed in with it, providing some beautiful contrast and texture. Early material was mined in Russia, Africa. It's used in carvings and various kinds of beads and artwork. This plate is one we have in our collection, and it's from some of the old Russian material. Newer Russian material was found near the Shara River in Yakutia, Russia, and is a new mineral that was called charoite. And it's the beautiful purple color mixed with some other minerals. And this purple color is very popular, again, used in carvings and beads, and has become a very popular lapidary material in the last several decades. Well, one of my favorites is Variscite. And okay, you have to imagine a bowling ball, finding a bowling ball in the ground in southern Utah, and taking that bowling ball sized piece of rock and slicing it in half and finding this on the inside. This is what these Variscite nodules look like. They mine these, they cut them in half, and you get this beautiful color and textures that have, again, become very popular in carvings and art objects and jewelry. And it deserves a closer look. You can look at the detail. All of these different colors are, in fact, different minerals. It's a aluminum phosphate colored by various amounts of iron, and it's just a mineral paradise, but also just an artistic wonder. Now you think about Mother Nature didn't really have to do this, but isn't it pretty amazing she did? Well, feldspars. Feldspar is one of the more common minerals making up much of the Earth's crust. Most granites, volcanic rocks, are predominantly feldspar. Well, in some cases, you get chunks of feldspar or feldspar crystals that have interesting enough properties or colors that they can also be carved or used as gem materials. One of the best examples is a material called labradorite. It's named after Labrador, Canada, where it's first found, although now a lot of it also comes from Madagascar. And if you can look at this material under a very powerful microscope, you'd see it's made up of alternating layers of sodium and calcium-rich feldspar, and it's those tiny microscopic layers that interact with light, that diffracts the light to give it this wonderful play of colors and light on the surface. And this is a carving. And when you look, you see what? The carving of a soldier wearing a helmet. Well, if you look more carefully, perhaps you've noticed, maybe not, on the back head of the carving of the soldier is a carving of an old man's face with a beard. And so this is a carving of the young man and the old man, the left and the right, in labradorite from Canada. This piece stands about 6 inches tall, so it's actually a nice size carving. And here's another example of a labradorite, a type of feldspar found in Eastern Oregon. And the crystals there have this beautiful color of greens and sort of coppery to red. It's called sunstone. And particularly modern artists these days have really taken to this material. They love sort of the ethereal colors and the transparency and have produced some really beautiful kind of modern carvings out of these sunstones from Oregon. And of course, we think of emerald as a material that typically is faceted to gemstones, but before it was faceted, or in some cases even after, the Moghuls in India loved carving emerald. Emerald, the green color, was a magical material for the Muslims, for the Islamic religion, the Mughals, and they often would carve intricate decorations. This is a lotus flower. This is about 3 inches in diameter, about 100-carat emerald that was carved in the early 1700s in India. And then it was later set into the platinum and diamond setting in Paris, and eventually ended up in the hands of a family in New Jersey. And then Madeline Murdoch of that family left it as a bequest to the Smithsonian. So it's an emerald that started out in Colombia in South America, ended up in India, was carved there, went to Paris, went to New Jersey, and finally ended up at the Smithsonian. And here's another example of a material that we think of normally as a gem material, aquamarine, the bluish form of beryl. And we think of aquamarine as gems and jewelry. Well, this is a 10,000 carat aquamarine gem that is almost 14 inches tall, and obviously is not set in a piece of jewelry, but in itself is a piece of art. This was cut from a crystal that weighed over 100 pounds. It was found in Brazil in the late 1980s. And it's still considered to be the largest, finest aquamarine crystal ever found in the world. And the largest piece ended up in Idar-Oberstein, Germany, where Bernd Moonsteiner, one of the great gem carvers, one of the great gem artists in the world, saw this and just had to make something special. As one of the Germans there said, what nature made large, man should not make small. And so it'd be a shame to cut this into just small gemstones. So they created this large obelisk with Bernd Moonsteiner putting these, they called negative facets or concave facets on the back side of the piece to just light up the interior of it and create a truly beautiful piece of art. And this was then recently donated to the Smithsonian. It's on display there now and has become a very popular piece in our gem collection. One of my favorite pieces in our collection, honestly, it's just such a wonderful carving. This is a carving that was done out of elbaite tourmaline from Mozambique. Again, tourmaline is a material we commonly think as faceted to gems, as something that's used in jewelry. But here, they took a piece of tourmaline, it was carved, and we see two different views of the same carving under the same lighting conditions. So we're looking profile on the left, and we see the deep pink purple color of the elbaite crystal. Then if we turn that carving 90 degrees, now looking face on, the light is now traveling through that elbaite crystal in a different direction. It's being absorbed differently, and we see a different color completely. That difference in the color of the crystal as you turn it from one direction to another is called pleochroism. It's because light is being absorbed differently as it travels through the crystal in different directions. And the carver here was so clever to do this carving so that it exactly showed this beautiful change in color as you turn the face from profile to face on. So this stands about 2 inches tall, not large, but really elegant. So I just wanted to finish by taking you to one of the places where the lapidary work has been some of the finest in the world for centuries. And that, of course, Idar-Oberstein, Germany, long recognized as the major cutting lapidary center in Europe and well known around the world. And if you're at all interested in stones or lapidary arts, or just want to go to a beautiful place, Idar-Oberstein is a wonderful destination. It's about 2 hours south of Frankfurt in Germany. It's in this beautiful setting, kind of in this lovely valley, and see the church. There's a castle in the upper left, and it's an area completely devoted to its history of lapidary arts. And there is the fabulous Edelstein Museum there. We've seen some pieces from that. Edelstein meaning gemstone, and absolutely gorgeous things. But also I had a chance to visit some of the workshops there where the craftsmen are still creating these beautiful things using the same hand tools, the same techniques, the same skills that have been passed down for centuries. Here you see one of the carvers with a piece of Brazilian agate that is eventually going to turn into two playful, what are they? Two playful little animals. Oh, shoot, I'm blanking on the name here. Anyway, two little animals that are playing together. Meerkats, that's the word I was thinking of, two little meerkats. This is another gentleman I met there. And this fellow takes big chunks of optically clear quartz, and by hand, I watched him holding it up to a wheel using hand tools and drills, creates from these large chunks of quartz these very delicate objects. All of the objects you see on these shelves are cut or polished from natural quartz. These things are no more than 1 millimeter or 2 thick. They're absolutely so delicate, so beautiful. All of these done by this gentleman by hand. In the upper left, the cockatoos, these are kunzite. The lower left, the little mouse, is morganite, beryl. All the flowers you see on the right and everything else around them is all made out of stone material. And it goes on and on. You know, you just can't imagine. Paul Dreyer, one of the well-known cutters, cutting families in Idar-Oberstein, examples of some of the beautiful carvings that their workshops have produced and are on display or have been sold from their workshop. So the materials are beryl, or in some cases tourmaline, quartz, amethyst, agate, the monkey in the upper right. And finally, if you like bears and dogs and cats, all cut out of, beautifully carved out of quartz and beryl and agate and various materials. It goes on and on. And so hopefully giving you an idea of just incredible talents that are still at work in places like Idar-Oberstein, although much of the work is now being done by the older generation. There's a lot of concerns about how this is going to go for the future. But it's well worth a visit. You'll see some beautiful things. So hopefully tonight you've had a chance to see some of the beautiful things that have happened as a result of wonderful things from nature being combined with the skilled hands and creative craftsmanship of people, but also in many cases, just nature all by herself, creating absolutely beautiful things in stone that of course are there and preserved forever. And I have to say, you know, I've seen a lot of art in my life. I've seen a lot of gem jewelry materials, but still the best artist that I've ever come across is Mother Nature. And there are very few things I see in art museums that don't remind me of something I've already seen somewhere in nature, and particularly in geological materials. So it's, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this evening some of the treasures from our collections, some of the beautiful things that I've had a chance to see or to experience in my career. And I hope this inspires you to take a look at the exhibition at Hillwood, the beautiful things they have there, maybe take a trip to either Oberstein or hopefully when our museum reopens, come back down to the Smithsonian, come into our galleries and see up close some of the pieces that I've had a chance to show you pictures of. So again, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Hillwood, thank you very much for hosting me. But the one sad thing is we weren't able to start this evening by walking through the gardens, taking a walk through the house, sharing some time talking together, and then having a chance to sit down and have a lecture. But I appreciate you joining me, and I hope now we'll have some questions I can answer. Thank you very much.
Oh, Jeff, thank you so much. You have really given us so much visual splendor tonight, and you have sparked a couple questions from our attendees that I would love to share with you to have you answer.
Please, I'd love to try to do that.
Fantastic. Henrietta asks, what gives the blue color to the agates from Chihuahua and elsewhere?
Blue agates have invariably been dyed. It turns out that agates, because of that fibrous texture, are quite porous. And so they learned a long time ago, even way back in Germany, that if you take agates and you put them in water with dye, red dye, blue dye, green dye, whatever, that dye will eventually seep into this porous texture of the agates and produce all kinds of wonderfully colored stones. So many of the pink and blue and green, other sort of non-earth tone colored agates that you might see out there probably have been dyed. One exception to that is yellows. You do see some pretty bright yellows in natural agates, although that doesn't mean that they always are natural. But it is something you have to be thoughtful about. If you're going to spend a lot of money to buy a piece of agate, for example, you want to be assured that it is, in fact, a naturally colored material, because many of them are dyed just to make them more saleable.
Oh, fascinating. We also have a question about Hillwood's founder. How many items were given to the Smithsonian by Marjorie Merriweather Post?
Boy, you know, I'm not sure I have a total right off the top of my head, but I will have to say it's a large number. And let me just say here, you know, generally, if I give a talk about our national gem collection at the Smithsonian, one of the things that I'll start out by saying is, you know, what really put us on the map in terms of a destination to see great gems and to build a national gem collection was the Hope Diamond arriving in 1958. But if that was the beginning, if that was the spark, what really put the wind in our sails, what really turned us from just being the Hope Diamond into truly a national gem collection were the many gifts that came in the early 1960s and after from Marjorie Merriweather Post, and actually in many cases through her encouragement from other people that she knew. And so you look at things like Napoleon diamond necklace, Napoleon diadem, Marie Antoinette earrings, the Blue Heart diamond, the Indian emerald necklace, the jadeite vase. I mean, on and on. These are all pieces that came to us from Marjorie Merriweather Post or her family. And as you walk around this room that's behind me in the picture, probably there's no other donor that is as much represented in our collection as Marjorie Merriweather Post. So she really was the person that's responsible for giving us that jump start that sort of propelled us into the national prominence that we have today. So I don't have a number, but all I can say is a lot. And she's someone that will always be part of the start of our national gem collection.
Another question that we have is about malachite. Is it possible for an expert to tell the source of a piece of malachite? It is found in so many places.
Yeah. I would say if you have an expert who has seen a lot of malachite and has had a chance to do a little bit of analysis or really study the material, you might be able to figure that out. Now, you know, one polished piece in a ring, that might be a little bit hard. If you have a few pieces of it or a lot of it in a carving or piece of jewelry, you might be able to figure that out. But so I would say in most cases, the answer is yes. but there are going to be times where I think it will be hard to tell. In many cases, one of the ways we know where the malachite likely came from is how old the piece is, because there are certain localities that started producing malachite only at certain times in history. So we know if the piece is older than, let's say, when it was coming out of the Congo, well, then it couldn't have come from there. So all kinds of ways to try to figure that out. But
And then here, Terry is asking, what is the colorant in, oh, and I'm probably gonna pronounce this wrong, charoite? Charoite?
Charoite.
There we
Yeah,
go.
the charoite, that sort of purpley pink color, is due to manganese in the structure. Very often when we see purples, pinks in nature, reds, manganese is one of the major coloring agents. Not always, but in many cases.
And we have another question. Does DC have local mineral artists?
Oh, there are, and I'm not going to be able to list names right now, but I've had the opportunity over the years to give talks, to participate, to be involved with a number of the local gem mineral lapidary societies. There's one in DC, a couple in Virginia, a couple in Maryland, and they're full of really talented and enthusiastic people that have all kinds of creativity that I wish I had. And many of them collect minerals, but many of them also create beautiful things. Some of them are carvers, and there are some local people that have produced some beautiful carvings. And you see some of them, a lot of times these local clubs will have shows. And if you look at their websites, like the Northern Virginia Club or the Montgomery County Club, you'll see when they have their local shows. And a lot of times these things will be exhibited in these local shows. So you have a chance to meet the people, to see some of these materials. So yeah, I think, but unfortunately, like so many places, there are probably talented people that none of us just have heard about. And so I have no doubt that there are people that have made some beautiful things here in DC.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's probably a fantastic question to make our last one. It's from Catherine. Do you have a favorite piece in the Smithsonian collection?
Oh, it's whatever one I kind of looked at last in some ways. In the collection, that's a big thing to try to, and I'll be honest with you. I guess, somebody once asked me, okay, if there was a threat to the collection, the building was on fire, what is it you would grab and take out with you? Well, of course, we'd have to pick up the Hope Diamond, right? You just can't not do that. But, there's also this other blue diamond that was given to us by Marjorie Merriweather Post, the Blue Heart, which is in many ways even more beautiful. And so, that's one of these treasures of the earth you just can't leave behind. But then in my other pocket, I've got to grab, we have a diamond crystal called the Oppenheimer Diamond Crystal. But you can't leave that behind. You got to stick that in your pocket and take that too. And, I would probably be scooping up things as fast as I could because, any one of them is a treasure that you'd hate to lose. But, let's go back to, it seems silly, but some of these agates, some of these jaspers that we saw, the textures, the colors, I mean, oh my gosh, some of those are from localities that are long ago exhausted. They're not finding that material anymore. The only way you see it is for sale or in old collections or in art museums or whatever. And in many ways, as valuable, as irreplaceable as some of our other great historic gem pieces. So it's just kind of a matter of sort of what really catches your eye, because most of our collection is irreplaceable, and I would be it would be a horrible thing to think about losing any of them.
Well, that leaves us with so many reasons to appreciate what all the stories and the beautiful, beautiful images that you showed us tonight. Thank you again so much.
Well, I can't take credit for the images. I have to give Mother Nature credit for most of that and a lot of skilled artists. But again, it's been a pleasure to share these beautiful things with all of you. And I certainly look forward to a time when we can do this all together in person and enjoy having conversations about these beautiful things. In the meantime, my best wishes to everybody. Please stay safe, stay well, all do smart things, and let's hope we're all together and enjoying these wonderful things from nature together sometime soon. So again, thank you very much for having me this evening. It's been a pleasure.
You are welcome. And thank you all to everybody who attended tonight. And we hope to see you next week for our next Tuesday lecture. Good evening and take care, everyone.
Good night.